everybody. Welcome to another episode of Purple Insider presented by FanDuel. Matthew Coller here, along with Dane Mizutani of the Pioneer Press inside the Indiana Convention Center at the NFL Combine, where we have just spent the last, I would say, hour plus speaking with acting general manager of the Minnesota Vikings, Rob Brzezinski, along with head coach of the Minnesota Vikings, Kevin O'Connell. And this was something that, I'm going to be honest with you, Dane, I've been looking forward to quite a bit to see what Kevin O'Connell and Rob Brzezinski would have to say about the quarterback position, their roles, the approach to free agency and philosophy, the salary cap. And guess what? We got answers to all of those things. And I'm going to throw out a little PSA and then we'll get right into it, which is here at the Combine, I'm going to give you the attendance in these meetings. And if you read anything that does not cite these places, then they were not there. That was Dane, myself, Alec Lewis, Kevin Seifert, Emily Leiker, Ben Gessling, and Vikings Entertainment. I think that's the list,
the whole
right?
list, yep.
So if it comes from anywhere else, then someone's either taking it or it wasn't actually said. So let's fire away right with the quarterback position and what Kevin O'Connell and Rob Brzezinski had to say. O'Connell talked with us a lot. In fact, he even went back to 2024 when he had made declarative statements about J.J. McCarthy being the franchise quarterback. That's something, Dane, that you and I have actually talked quite a bit about at that point and how they felt about J.J. McCarthy. And what O'Connell said was that McCarthy has shown all the traits, and he did in the initial 2024 training camp, and that he did throughout this season, all the traits of someone that they viewed as a franchise quarterback. But of course, we all know that he has gone through quite a rocky road since, and he pointed out that of a potential 34 games, he's only been on the field for 10 of them. So as we got into the idea of different quarterbacks, he wanted to point out that those traits have been shown by J.J. McCarthy during his time as a Minnesota Viking, but that they have to consider different options because, as he went on to say, when they have had their starting quarterback for 17 games, they won 13 in 2022 and 14. And I think he pointed to 6 different starting quarterbacks in the seasons where they did not have success. So, Dane, what did you make of the way that O'Connell framed, because I'm sure he had a lot of time to think about it, how he was going to relay his message to us about where J.J. McCarthy stands and the Vikings' other potential options at quarterback?
Yeah, I think when I was listening to him, when we were conversating with him today, like, my thought was, is he going to change his tune in any way, shape, or form than how he spoke to us at the end of the season back in January when he said we want a competitive environment around J.J. McCarthy? And the answer is no, he did not change his tune at all. I think what we can take away from talking to Kevin O'Connell and also talking to Rob Brzezinski is there isn't a commitment to J.J. McCarthy being the unquestioned starter next year. That's not necessarily breaking news because I didn't think we were going to come here and they were going to say, you know what, 2 months later, nobody playing football on the Minnesota Vikings, he's our guy, actually. We changed our mind. But it's still newsworthy when we hear from the head coach and the acting general manager that they're going to bring in competition. To what level of competition are they going to bring in? We've discussed that since October, since November. But I think a takeaway today was that they're not going to leave any stone unturned. They are willing to, it sounds like, not rule out any option as far as who could be brought in terms of competition. Something that Rob Brzezinski kept saying, though, in his conversation with us is you can't manufacture something that's not there. That basically to me meant we could want something, but if it's not on the table, if a team isn't going to trade their superstar quarterback, or if a guy from that is in free agency doesn't want to come here, they can't manufacture something that isn't there. But they at no point committed to J.J. McCarthy as our guy unquestionably. On the opposite end of that spectrum, they did not say we're done with him completely. Speaking in declaratives either way would have been a shock to me because it's kind of showing all your hands, and part of this job and this role that they're in is not showing all their hands, is making sure to kind of operate at that cruising altitude. But I don't know that they are completely done with J.J. McCarthy in the way that maybe it's been framed in some situations. But I think right now, like, it's clear to me that they're going to bring in competition. That was clear in January. It's now clear in February. But we're still trying to kind of parse out what is that competition going to look like. But I think we're still trying to parse it out because they're still trying to parse it out. I think all options are on the table for them. And we're going to find out here in a couple of weeks what that actually means for the Vikings moving forward.
So when I asked Kevin O'Connell about this specifically, the way that I framed my question was, to what degree do you want competition for J.J. McCarthy? I mean, I think we all understand that competition has to happen. They have to have a better quarterback situation even behind J.J. were he to be the starter. And what I was looking for was, will Kevin O'Connell or Rob Brzezinski rule out the idea that someone else is starting? Will they tell us, guys, you need to stop talking about Kyler Murray. You need to stop talking about Derek Carr, not maybe even directly, but sort of indirectly. They could say, we still want, JJ to have every opportunity to win the job. And we want to have someone that we could rely on if he were hurt. That they could have said that, but they did not. And Rob Brzezinski said specifically, we are not ruling out any option right now at the quarterback position. And I think that tells you that they are seriously considering starting quarterbacks for the Minnesota Vikings in 2026 that are not here. And while I think that they want to make sure they're not being disrespectful to J.J. McCarthy and being empathetic of the situation, they also, at one point, Brzezinski said we need a baseline level of quarterback play. And I think it's very clear from the numbers last year that they did not reach a baseline level of quarterback play with J.J. McCarthy or Carson Wentz or Max Brosmer or anyone else who threw a pass last season. They did not reach that. And the same would go for 2023 after Kirk Cousins got hurt. But to not rule out the idea of going out and getting a Derek Carr or going out and getting a Kirk Cousins or an Aaron Rodgers or anybody else. I mean, even Brzezinski said another part of it is the salary cap, which we'll get into, and another part of it is their interest from the quarterbacks that they're looking at. So if they're looking into different options, they first have to find out, well, how much will it cost? And we talk about Malik Willis a lot. Well, how much will Malik Willis cost? And then also, I'm not saying they said that. I'm saying when we talk about it, like that's a factor. How much would it cost to trade for Derek Carr? How much would it cost to get Kyler Murray here if they were to sign him? Those are sort of examples of it. They didn't clearly lay out specifics, but when they're talking about is there interest and would those people come here and how much would it cost? Once again, that leads the road back to, somebody else might be the starting quarterback of the Minnesota Vikings in 2026. And I don't know about you, Dane. I was thinking as they were talking that there might be a world, and this is another thing they were not ruling out, where there's a 2026 starting quarterback to stabilize the position, but J.J. McCarthy is still the backup quarterback, and they want him to develop and they want him to stay healthy for an entire year, and they want him to be the guy that goes in if the other quarterback gets hurt. This is a reach based on what we heard, but I thought it fit with every comment that if you're talking about a quarterback who's more of just a 2026 guy, to give them a baseline of quarterback play for 2026 so they can be competitive with an impressive core of players that they have and give them a chance to compete in the NFC North, while developing JJ for the year that he never really got behind the scenes. And then that would give them an opportunity going into 2027 to evaluate JJ McCarthy, how far he was able to come along, because if he has truly sold them on the traits, then it really is the development portion of it that did not come far enough last year to make an argument that he can meet that, at least consistently, not only the requirement of being on the field, but also meet the baseline level of play. Do you think that that's a reach based on their comments?
No, I don't think that's necessarily a reach. And I think what we should distinguish here is that none of the names that we're bringing up, they bring up, because that would be tampering, and nobody tampers in the NFL. But if we are theorizing Malik Willis or Kyler Murray, Kevin O'Connell and Rob Brzezinski did not at any point mention exact names. But I don't think that's a reach. And I think when you describe it that way of maybe in their self-evaluation of how the quarterback position has been handled over the last 2 years, and moving on from Sam Darnold, who, by the way, won a Super Bowl, and handing the reins to J.J. McCarthy with competition in training camp last year looking like Sam Howell, so not really competition at all. Maybe in their self-evaluation and their self-reflection of the quarterback position, it was something to the effect of, should we have given this guy more time to develop? So I don't think you're reaching there. And part of why I don't think you're reaching there is because when I asked Kevin O'Connell, like, do you still think he can be a franchise quarterback for the Vikings? He immediately said the answer is yes. And then he took us on kind of the journey that J.J. McCarthy's been on, and back to 2024 when he said what he said in Cleveland about, I think he can be a franchise quarterback. He mentioned the traits like you had mentioned earlier. And then he said a lot of those feelings are still the same. This is verbatim. It's just that the timeline is in a different place for all of us. So I think what that, to me, or that takeaway, it kind of plays into what you were just theorizing, is the timeline is in a different place for J.J. McCarthy. Obviously, he's 2 years into his career. He started 10 of the 34 games that he's been on the roster. To then just declare him the franchise quarterback again, like, they still believe in the traits and the qualities they've seen, but we're now going to be 3 years into the rookie contract. The timeline looks different for him. The timeline also looks different for Kevin O'Connell, for ownership who is ready to kind of be competitive right now, for the team that is built to win right now. So I think it would be kind of a fool's errand to just move forward and say, we think he's our guy, and just kind of continue to try and push that square peg into a round hole. But I still think there is a belief there. I just don't know if the belief is like, we can move forward right now and feel confident about how things are going to be competitively for the 2026 season. But I don't get the sense that they want to move on from J.J. McCarthy completely, turn that page, and just say we busted on that draft pick, which is why I don't think your way of thinking and your reading into what our conversation was with them is too much of a reach, because there is a world where a new starting quarterback for 2026 could help J.J. McCarthy, who's still 23 years old, develop into somebody who could be the starting quarterback in 2027 and beyond. Now, that's going to be a tough sell. And again, they didn't mention any of these names, but if I say, I don't know who the name would be, but Kirk Cousins, I wanted a different name. You are going to be our quarterback for 1 year. That might jive with where he is at in his career. But if you say to somebody else, Mac Jones, I guess you'd have to trade for him, but a different name, you're only going to be our quarterback for 2026. You wouldn't say that in the negotiation, but if that was the implication, that kind of reduces the bucket of players that are going to be available at your disposal. But I don't think that they're necessarily done with J.J. McCarthy, maybe in the same way that I did when it was fresh at the end of the season. I think they've seen enough there to want to believe in him, but you have 52 other guys on the roster to think about for 2026, and a team that expected to win or compete for a Super Bowl this year. A lot of that core is still the same moving forward. Do I think that means they're going to push all their chips in for 2026? No, not necessarily. I think we'll get to that too. But they need somebody that they can rely on, and if they don't think J.J. McCarthy is ready for that, then they have to make that decision here in a couple of weeks. And even beyond that, like, if he hasn't been on the available other than 10 of the 34 games, you have to have a better option than Carson Wentz or Max Brosmer. So I think that plays into it too. It's twofold. A guy who could maybe start, maybe give J.J. McCarthy a time to develop, or a guy that you can just feel very good about if J.J. McCarthy wins the job in training camp and happens to get hurt again, can win you games and not have such a significant drop-off that we saw at times last season.
And you used the word buckets. That was a word that Rob Brzezinski used, of drawing from potential different buckets with quarterback options. And do you look at the one-year veteran? Do you look at somebody who might be a longer-term potential option? Do you look at somebody who might be one level down from that, but you could trust them as the starter? And to me, if you say if we just work through this kind of logically, if you say all options are open, that to me means you're looking for a starter, because that's the easiest one to rule out. Like, we want someone there to be what, they could easily say what we kind of envisioned for Daniel Jones for last year when we were making our pitch to him, or kind of what Carson was, but unfortunately Carson got hurt. And there's so many other ways to phrase that other than, hey, we might, we'll look at every potential option. There's different buckets we could draw from and so forth. And there's kind of like the old 1-year option guy bucket, which I think that they wouldn't mind going to, because if you look at a Malik Willis, your price is probably going to be pretty high, and you don't really know a lot about him based on his career. It's been a very short amount of time. So even though from you and I's seat, we could say, hey, that'd be the best guy to go with because there's upside, there's other factors that go into that. And that's why I keep coming back to the Derek Carr, the Kirk Cousins, the 1 year, give JJ McCarthy time to develop. And in a world where we just saw Sam Darnold win the Super Bowl, in a world where you have a head coach who once said that organizations fail quarterbacks more than quarterbacks fail organizations, they would be much more likely to make the case that they could develop J.J. McCarthy from the sidelines for an entire year and leave the door open, which timelines, though, when he said that, I thought it was a real recognition of not he's saying I'm on the hot seat, but of him understanding that if you get this deep into your career as a coach, and he knows what they signed up for when they entered this business, is that it is, what have you done for me lately, not for long, all those types of things. I think there's referring to the rookie contract, but there's more referring to you have a group of players who are veterans, and you have a coach who's been around with these guys for a while. And if you don't win, there's not going to be a lot of excuses that are accepted when you've spent the most cash in the entire NFL and a first-round pick on a quarterback. And if it's not happening for you still, like, what other button can you potentially push? Now, one of the main questions that we have been asking since Rob Brzezinski became the active general manager is it now KOC's show? Is KOC and Brian Flores, are they going to go buck wild? I mean, really, that's been a lot of the conversation. And I think my first thought was, hey, there's a lot of chips and they're going to push them all into the middle of the table. I think what Rob Brzezinski did for us today was take some cold water and spray it all over the idea that it's 2026 or bust, that KOC has got full command of the organization, is just going to send out draft picks and spend all the money and bump it into the future. So we asked him, Rob Brzezinski, specifically, who has the final decision-making power. Now, of course, he said, look, one of the reasons I'm here is to get consensus and bring people together. And I think that Rob, knowing his personality over the years, is a great man to do that with his credibility and all the things he's seen, all the meetings he's sat on. He certainly brings that to the table when you're talking about a meeting. But he did ultimately get around to saying that the Wilfs have given him the final say. So were there to be a situation, and it sounds like he and KOC are on the same page with a lot of things, but were there to be a situation where Kevin O'Connell was saying, trade 4 first-round, 3, they want it to be 5 for Joe Burrow, but 3 first-round draft picks up to get Ty Simpson, that Rob Brzezinski could say, I respect what you're trying to do here, but we're not going to do that. And he used the word numerous times, guardrails, which it all sounds like, I understand the pressure we're under, I understand the roster that we've got here and the age of that roster, but we're not going crazy because this organization is going to carry on for a very long time after this. And even when I asked about restructuring contracts and things like that, he did point out that, when you restructure a contract, you still have to pay the bill. Mm-hmm. And so as we go on to overthecap.com and whatever other websites, and we just go restructure, that doesn't necessarily mean that's what the Minnesota Vikings are going to do. And what I was feeling like coming out of the conversation is that the free agency approach might be a lot more shrewd than maybe we were expecting with, hey, they're going to go nuts. They're going to sign, the most expensive players and push all the money into the future because there is no future. I did not get that sense from Rob Brzezinski. I got the sense that one of his main jobs is to not allow them to be pushed into a corner where they feel like they have to do that.
Yeah, I think talking to him, you can really get the sense, and we talk to him frequently off the record in the press box. He's really accessible. But this is the first time we've talked to him on the record, certainly since I've covered the team. I think since you've covered the team. Because he's not the GM. We wouldn't have a reason to talk to him off the record or on the record. But what I got in our 30 minutes sitting down with him, really going back and forth, is how much he cares about this organization. And I think the care for the organization supersedes winning in 2026, all or nothing. And it also supersedes, like, this is my 2-month trial period to prove myself for the job. So he's not coming in, spending all this money, saying, screw it, then if I don't get the job, it's not my problem. Like, I think he cares about the organization, having been here since 1999, to take a lot of pride in the role he's been given right now in this kind of interim period for the Vikings, and set them up to be good, whether he's the GM or whether somebody else is the GM. And to that, like, that's commendable. And I think beyond that, it's like the Wilfs picked the right person to kind of handle this period of time of things being in flux because of the timing of Kwesi Adofo-Mensah being let go. But I think it's also clear that Rob Brzezinski knows what he's doing. And I think when you fire a general manager like the Vikings did in a kind of random time of the year, right, like the week before the Super Bowl, there is kind of this idea or this kind of nugget of doubt, the seed of doubt that gets planted in the fan base of, like, we have no idea what we're doing. This organization is just shooting from the hip, and we're going to be screwed. Like, I think what needs to be kind of taken into account is Rob has done this for a long time. He knows what he's doing, and I got that sense even before we talked to him, but even more so talking to him for a half hour, is that there is a plan in place. This guy has been here for a long time. He's seen things that work. He's seen things that don't work. And I think he's rooted in making sure everybody is on the same page, and he is kind of the perfect steward, in my opinion, like, to kind of usher in that new era, whether it's going to be him leading the charge or not. The point about him having final say is important. Like, that if push came to shove, Rob Brzezinski will make the final decision. Like, that is an important news statement. But I think Rob Brzezinski's superpower, one of them, is that it probably won't get to that point where he has to say, I'm putting my foot down, because he's so good at, like, connecting people. You talk to anybody in the Vikings organization, he's a connector. But I think it does matter that I think there was a thought when stuff kind of hit the fan a few weeks ago, like, great, now the Vikings are just going to push all their chips to the center and be really, really aggressive in terms of just reckless in terms of how they are going to compete for next season. I don't think Rob Brzezinski is going to let that happen. Doesn't mean they're not trying to win the Super Bowl in 2026, but I think that distinction is important. It's not 2026, all the chips in the center of the table, and then no plan after. There's still a plan in place beyond next season, and I think we'll probably see that reflected in how they handle the next couple of months.
And I do think that it is important to have that distinction, because then we do have a sense for how this operation is being run. And I also think it tells us a little bit about, now this, again, I don't want to stretch too much here and speak out of school and have this wrong, but I think it does speak to Kevin O'Connell and his job after the general manager that came in with him was let go is being evaluated, that the organization is not being turned over to him in the same way that, like, Andy Reid runs the Kansas City Chiefs or Sean Payton runs the Denver Broncos. The Wilfs want the person in the organization that cares so deeply about it, and he made that very clear to us. I mean, I know he even said, like, everyone says they have the best fans, but man, like, Rob can really speak to the Vikings fan base, everything that they've been through, and you know, all that sort of stuff. The people that go on the road, the ups and downs that fans have gone through with this. And his whole point is, more or less, I'm not going to let this thing go into the gutter to try to win in one season. And I think the team has overall kind of planned for this situation, but where I made the dot connection with those comments was about the draft. because if you do not have a lot of cap space, in fact, they have minus 40 million in cap space at the moment until they start doing stuff. And he pointed out there's going to be some tough decisions and players who probably won't be here. I think we know who those guys are at this point. But at some point, when that happens, you run it up to a certain number, and then you have to pay the bill eventually if you start restructuring every contract and push every dollar down the road. You have to succeed in the draft, and we all know that you have to succeed in the draft. I think when you've built for a certain moment and your roster is very good, that you can have draft picks go out to move up or to make trades or whatever it might be, but that has implications down the road, just as everything else does. And it felt to me like he was speaking to, it's really important to nail this draft. And it's also really important potentially. And again, I'm reaching a little bit because these things I want to make clear was not definitively said we're trading down or something like that. But I think he understands that the draft is the most important part of this offseason outside of the quarterback position because of the future of this roster. And you know that there is a core there, but it's not going to be together forever. And you need players that are on rookie contracts eventually. Like, they built for this moment around the rookie QB contract. That was always the plan. So it's not like they got here by accident. But going forward, and the way that Rob is talking, I want you to comment on both of these things. The draft part of it is one. The way that Rob spoke was very much like someone who might end up being the general manager of this team. I'm not saying that he's, came out and said, I'm the GM now or something, like I'm the captain now. It just felt like very GM-esque to be talking in a very measured way about what needs to happen for this team to have long-term success.
Yeah, I'll touch on the draft thing first. Yes, I think he sees the draft as extremely important, probably also rooted in the fact that the last few drafts have not been up to par in terms of what I think the Vikings expected from drafting prospects, developing prospects, and having them turn into starting players on offense or defense. So I think he understands that. He's been around the league long enough to understand a lot of times the best way to build your roster is through the draft, is developing players that you drafted and having them turn from small-time contributors to large-time contributors. So I think outside of quarterback, Rob understands and is kind of, he kept referencing the support system he has, the scouting staff that he has, the experience that exists in that room. I think all of that coincides with the understanding that we have to nail this draft. Probably goes without saying, because you ask 31 other GMs that are here and they'll say we have to nail this draft. But I think Rob understands the importance of this maybe more than most right now because of where he's been, because of how the last 4 years have played out, and because of the roster that they have in place and the cap problems that they have, because at least partially due to the fact that they haven't drafted well. So the draft's extremely important. But when you talk about Rob and the way he carries himself, yeah, I thought that to myself multiple times today. Like, man, this guy sounds like a general manager. This guy sounds like he knows exactly what he's doing. This guy sounds like somebody who, if I worked for him in a role that was, underneath, and like it sounds like somebody who can get people to kind of all pull on the same rope in a way that I think you want a general manager to handle themselves and carry a team and run a franchise. I also just kind of thought he handled questions he didn't want to answer pretty well. Like, it's not great for me and you when the guy just says, like, I'm probably not going to answer that. I'm not going to get into that. But that's allowed, and I think that speaks to an experience level too of, yeah, I don't have to go into extreme detail on certain things that we want to keep in house. So the way he handled himself today, like, I don't think necessarily the Wilfs are going to look back and say, like, well, on February 24th at the Combine, you did a really good job in that press conference with the 6 beat writers that were there, and say, like, use that as a barometer for whether he should get the job or not. But I think all the pieces matter over the next 2 months. And if he were to come out today and talk to us, and we were to come on this podcast and talk to you guys, and Emily and Ben were to go on their podcast and talk to you guys, and Alec and Kevin were to, and we were all to say, like, that guy has no clue what he's doing, like, that would have mattered. But this guy clearly knows what he's doing. He's speaking like a GM, and it wouldn't shock me if he was the guy who got the job in 2 months here. I thought it was also interesting that he gave the correct answer, the politically correct answer when asked, like, do you want this job? Do you look at this as a tryout period? Kevin Seifert asked him that. He said, I'm focused on the next 2 months. Like, that's kind of how I would assume that a general manager would answer that question. So I think if we were to give him some truth serum, he would say, yeah, he probably does want this job. But I don't think his want for this job is going to inform decisions he's going to make in the short term to bolster his opportunity of getting this job. But I did think that multiple times today. This guy just carries himself like the guy. So yeah, I think I could see him being the guy in a couple of months here.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely think that when we're talking about the trust of the ownership, the communication with the ownership, and who has a deeper understanding of the organization, and it matters to them so much. And that's why the restrictor plates have to be on, or the guardrails is the way that he put it, have to be on this offseason, because in the past, and I really feel like this happened last year, they really did just take all of the Wilfs' money and throw it at everything that moved in free agency. And some of it worked and some of it didn't, but there wasn't really cutting with a scalpel. It was much more with a chainsaw. And I think what his point is that he is going to not be making these short-term type of decisions just to try to get the job, just to try to impress the ownership. Like, the organization, its success, the franchise success, as someone who's been here for that long, is what matters most to him. And I think that's very, very authentic from knowing Rob for as long as we have, just casually on the side, and also knowing his the respect around the league, the respect within the building for Rob Brzezinski. We've already spoken to that at different times, but we're very aware that that's going to matter in this process as well, as they have to put together these different options and plans. I also, going back to the draft part of it, I asked Rob about like what he's learned over all these years, and he said about the draft and trying to succeed. And what he said was that putting together the draft board has to be as objective as possible. It cannot be that you're pushing up guys that you want for your needs. Now, yes, you rule out certain positions with first-round draft picks based on what you have. You're probably not taking a left tackle, on a Darisaw situation, but let's just, assume he's healthy. You're not taking a left tackle. So you can rule that out. But when you put together the draft board, you want to make sure you're also thinking longer term about it as well. Like, maybe if we're taking someone who is significantly worse as a prospect just because they fill a need, that is not going to be a good approach overall. And sometimes those guys end up being needed anyway. So I thought that was just kind of an interesting answer. What else stuck out to you? Because I have one other thing from Kevin O'Connell that was put in there. We actually heard a lot about the coaching staff from Kevin O'Connell, and I want to talk a little bit about that. So there's one more thing that stuck out to me about O'Connell, what he said about the coaching staff, and I think confirmed something I already thought. But did you have anything else from O'Connell or Brzezinski that you wanted to talk about?
Kind of just on the draft, it kind of goes back to what you were saying about how Rob Brzezinski described the objectivity needed in putting together a board. He also talked about how he perceives needs, like draft needs, like you see it on, you watch any NFL draft coverage, it'll be like the Vikings need XYZ. It'll be 3 positions. And he kind of gave us insight into his mind. He looks at it almost the opposite. Like, what do we not need? Mm-hmm. And then it kind of opens the door and I think that goes hand in hand with what you were talking about. If you pigeonhole yourself into these 3 needs on draft night and then you don't take one of those players, it immediately looks like you misstepped. So, like, what do the Vikings not need is probably the best way of looking at draft night when you're sitting down there judging whether you think they did a good job or not. Not the 3 positions that ESPN says they need, but look at the whole picture. There's obvious the left tackle. There's an obvious position that the Vikings are not going to draft. If you were to research their roster, you could decide pretty clearly they don't need this person. But I think it really does open the door when you kind of leave yourself the option of, okay, we maybe don't need this player acutely in this moment, but this is the best player on the board. Let's take him. It was just an interesting way to kind of hear kind of deeper into his mind about how he sees the draft. I just thought it was interesting hearing kind of everything he had to say about kind of the way he thinks the game. Because if you think about it, he's been here longer than all of us and longer than some people have been alive. He's been with the Vikings since 1999, and he's seen everything. So I did think it was super insightful to hear from him today, for the first time since I've really had a chance to kind of sit down with him. But yeah, just to kind of hear how he thinks the process, from top to bottom, from cap, from draft, from free agency. So I thought that was kind of part of the interesting takeaway too.
So just to go back to what Kevin O'Connell talked about with changes with the coaching staff, clearly there's been a lot of overhaul where they moved on from Chris Cooper and bring in Keith Carter into that position, but also Frank Smith, who is not that well of a known guy. Maybe if he had a cooler name, or if he was called Frank the Tank or something that people knew him for, but a highly respected coach that may one day be an NFL head coach. And he said that he was really interested in him because of his work with Mike McDaniel. Mm-hmm. And where it keeps coming back to me, and I think this was really confirmed, is that the run game is going to be a major emphasis here, and really is with the way that they've put together this coaching staff, because he talked about an outside zone type of scheme and how he wants to execute that scheme, which there's a lot of different versions of that. Like we talk about that as like the Gary Kubiak, the Kyle Shanahan or whatever. And in Miami, they were very successful at creating explosive run plays. Devin Achane or Raheem Mostert or pretty much whoever they had back there that could run quickly. They ended up averaging 5.5 to 6 yards per carry. And I think that he wanted to really dip into that and connect what they had done in Miami with Keith Carter's background in that outside zone. And it gives us, I think, a sense for what they want to be, and that O'Connell sees your tweets. Like, he understands that if you have a top 5 type of run game, it's a cheat code in the NFL. And also that they talked about reaching a baseline of quarterback play, which was another thing that really stuck out, was those words, baseline of quarterback play, which to me, again, sort of says, can you really get there? But if you have a baseline of quarterback play, that means you need to fill in the rest with what? The run game. And it looks like on paper that they did this with a lot of intent of becoming a much better run team. And they've added to this coaching staff, I think, with a very clear message that was confirmed to us today, that that's what they want to do. So the question, of course, Dane, is, are they actually going to do it? Are they actually going to do it? Well, doesn't that here? I'm working through this. I'm working on a lot of, like, if they said this, then it means this, then it means this, then it means, what are they doing at running back?
I think that might fall into part of the hard discussion or the hard conversations that Rob Brzezinski talks about. I mean, you don't have to look too deep into the cap websites to see the Aaron Jones. If they were to let him go, they could free up some money. I know they love Aaron Jones, so I don't want to come on here and say they're releasing Aaron Jones, because we don't know. But that would kind of fall into what I would think would be part of those hard conversations. If they do move on from Aaron Jones, I could see them trying to get a dynamic running back via the draft or free agency, because of, when you're connecting the dots, you bring in Frank Smith, who comes from Miami, who had explosive running backs there with Mike McDaniel, and Kevin O'Connell wants more of an explosive running game. Like, if you start to slowly piece those pieces together, I think come mid-March free agency, if they were to sign a guy, or come late April in the draft, if they were to draft a guy, a running back would fall in that line of, going back to what Rob Brzezinski said, maybe you don't need the position, but it's something that you would consider when you are piecing your board together. I did think the Frank Smith nugget from Kevin O'Connell was interesting, because, like, I won't go as far as saying like an admission of fault or like an admission of what I don't know, But to me, when he was brought in and hearing Kevin O'Connell talk to him today, it did seem like a moment of self-reflection from Kevin O'Connell of what am I not as good at in terms of the offensive side of the ball, and how can I lean on others to maybe kind of get to that next level. I felt vibes of that, of let me bring in this guy who's really good at this and pair him with myself who's really good at this, and kind of take more of a holistic approach to the offensive system as a whole. But yeah, the question is, like, you can say it in February, we're going to really rely on the run game. In September, on 3rd and 1, like, are we handing the ball off? Like that is the next step in this. But I commend Kevin O'Connell for self-reflecting and finding ways. It's clear he wants to run the ball better, and I think they've made moves in the early stages of the offseason that would reflect in kind of that ethos of like what he wants to happen. But there are many things that have to happen before the start of the season, and then once the season rolls, are you going to fully commit to being a good running team? Like, all of that remains to be seen, but they are investing in it right now, at least early in the offseason.
And one thing that he said about Keith Carter taking over that was not about the run game was that they get a lot of unique looks up front, but they don't always get a lot of blitzes because teams want to keep their safeties back on Justin Jefferson, of course. So he talked about liking the ideas of Keith Carter in terms of blocking those simulated pressures and different sort of stunts and twists and things like that I think they did struggle a lot against. Now, when Ryan Kelly was in there, they didn't struggle so much because Ryan Kelly is a football genius. But that's going to be a huge factor, too, is how are you going to resolve that from a personnel perspective. One last thing that I just wanted to mention was that Kevin O'Connell did talk quite emotionally about Rondale Moore, and you could tell how heartbroken he is about what happened with Rondale. And he said for him, when players are doing their rehab away from the facility, that he wants to make sure in the future that they stay connected to those players as best as they possibly can, because it is very, very difficult on players mentally, emotionally, to go through very serious injuries like this. And he wants to take that into the future. We have to make sure we do better there. And it's something that you always wonder, and I'm sure we'll get it leaked out at some point, what the NFLPA grades were for teams. But if you wonder why Kevin O'Connell gets graded as high as he does, it's because that's how he thinks. That he thinks, and that what could I have done for this player? What can I do in the future after something like this, something so tragic happens? So I wanted to mention that because that was just so recent, and clearly Kevin O'Connell is still very, very, very shaken by what happened. So let me get a couple of predictions from you, because every time we have things change or something like this, it's always good to see kind of where we stand. I would like you to predict for me who the starting quarterback of the Minnesota Vikings is on September, whatever it's going to be, 2026.
Wow, we talk about throwing people on the spot. I think you've sold me on Kyler Murray enough. Listening to the show, listening to you talk.
Thank you.
Just texting with you, like that to me fits in the bucket of a lot of the things we talked about today, what were talked about with us today. Like, I think when you go back to the phrase baseline level of quarterback play, for example, like they don't need the guy to be perfect, but they need them to be high enough floor to take what's there and make the most of it. But Kyler Murray is a guy who can do that and so much more. So I think if Kyler Murray is available, that's who I would target, and that's why he would be my prediction. There would be games, I think, where it would be wacky and you'd roll your eyes and say, what is going on? But I think the ceiling with Kyler Murray is immeasurably larger than the other quarterbacks, the other options that are probably on the table. So that's my prediction, and we'll find out if I'm right in a few weeks here. I just think they're going to swing as big as they can. And like, he is somebody, when you talk about we can't manufacture something that isn't there, that's what Rob Brzezinski said 10 times today. You can't manufacture something that isn't there. He did not say this name, but to me that reads, we can't trade for Joe Burrow if the Cincinnati Bengals aren't going to trade us Joe Burrow. But the Arizona Cardinals might release Kyler Murray, so he might just be there. And then it goes into, is there mutual interest, and there are negotiating things that need to happen. But Kyler Murray makes a lot of sense. Maybe I'm just Kyler Murray pilled listening to Purple Insider. But yeah, that's my prediction.
So I like Kyler Murray the best for all the ideas because I think the upside is the highest. I am, after today, going to select as my prediction for the Minnesota Vikings. Watch time matters.
Yeah.
I'm going to drag this out.
Here we go.
Derek Carr. I think Derek Carr is going to come out of retirement and play quarterback for the Minnesota Vikings in 2026. And I think what they're going to say is that J.J. McCarthy working behind Derek Carr in a, quote, competitive environment with Max Brosmer, whoever else they might bring in. I don't know. Maybe they'll get Anthony Richardson for the heck of it. That is going to be the best for his long-term future as the Minnesota Vikings quarterback. I think that's what they will say about it, and that Derek Carr gives them a baseline and brings a veteran into a veteran locker room that can throw the ball to number 18, Justin Jefferson, which is, to me, the most important thing about this baseline. Like, when you say baseline of quarterback play, it's like, throw it to Jefferson baseline? Is that what you mean? So that's going to be my prediction after listening to them talk today. How about this? Prediction on after we've heard the brass speak. Who will they draft, or what position?
I think running back. If Jeremiah Love's there at 18, like, I would just take him. I'd run to the podium and take him. But I mean, you look at the running game. I guess decisions will need to be made before then. Obviously, with free agency, who to let go, how to get under the cap. But if he's there, and you're bringing in Frank Smith, and you're leaning on Keith Carter in a way that maybe more than in the past, and you're really trying to improve your running game, like, if he is there at 18, which he very well might not be, he might test well and perform well at pro days and go in the top 10. He's one of the most dynamic players in the draft. But if he's there, I think they just run up to the podium, take him, move forward, really put an emphasis on this was a weakness for us, and we're doing everything in our power to make it a strength, not just with the decisions we've made on the coaching staff, but with the decisions we're making in the personnel department as well. Jeremiah Love, that's who if he's there at 18, that's who I think they'll take.
I have no idea. So I'm going to work through that the rest of the week. So you have to listen to all the episodes as by the end of the week, we'll make a prediction on who I think they will draft, and we'll do a draft sim. Last one. FanDuel has the Vikings right now as plus 700 to win the NFC North. That is last of the 4 teams. Would you change that based on what you heard today? Like, would you say to FanDuel, guys, this is the Vikings. Every other year they figure it out. Or would you agree with how they have it played out of the Lions, then the Packers, then the Bears, then the Vikings at plus 700?
Yeah, I think I'd probably leave it there, just because I think the biggest question mark with the Vikings is quarterback. And I did not hear anything today that would give me an idea of who the quarterback is going to be. So just from that simple thing alone, like, I don't know that you can push them above any of the 3 other teams that have established quarterbacks, that have people that the Vikings would probably move mountains to beat their quarterback in this present moment. So I think even though they do seem to pinball and miss the playoffs, make the playoffs, miss the playoffs, make the playoffs, so this would be the year that they are supposed to make the playoffs in that rotation. I think it's totally reasonable in present moment for them to be last place in the NFC North in terms of odds. If they go out and take a big swing, like if Kyler Murray is somebody who gets released and then they sign him, I think I might move my projections. I think FanDuel might move their projections. But right now, even though today it was pretty clear that all options are on the table for the Vikings, I don't get a sense of who that guy is going to be, so I can't move off of it.
I would leave it there as well because I don't know who to move. Who am I? Do you move the Lions? Do you move teams that know? But I also think that they will figure out something that when it happens, we go, yep, that makes complete sense with Vikings history, and I could totally see it working. I do not think that we're going to walk away going, that's all they did at quarterback? I don't know about that. Or they did what in the draft? I don't think that that's going to happen with Rob Brzezinski and Kevin O'Connell leading the way and Brzezinski having the final say. So that is it for Dane here and our breakdown of Kevin O'Connell and Rob Brzezinski's conversations with us. I want to say that if you want to read the exact quotes from top to bottom of what they said today, purpleinsider.football, I have a written breakdown, the Pioneer Press, ESPN, The Athletic, The Star Tribune. That's who was here. And click on their articles and read the whole thing with your whole brain as opposed to you understand what I'm getting at. So plenty more to come from Indianapolis. I will be here Wednesday doing a lot more interviews as well, and Thursday also. We're going to get the buzz from what's going on. Ben Gessling has agreed to come on, so we'll talk with him. We'll see if we could get Alec or Seifer. You know, they're up here. They're a little trickier to get, but plenty of other guests coming as well. So thank you, Dane, very much for your time, and thank you all for watching and listening from the NFL Combine.
Football.